They believed you were merely a student, an easy target for mockery and humiliation. They scorned your complexion, treating you as an outsider, convinced of your inability to retaliate. However, they were unaware they were provoking the wrong individual. Jamal Maro was not just any student. He was the son of Louis Maro, a name uttered with apprehension throughout the city, a man whose adversaries didn't merely lose, they vanished. Now, these tormentors were about to receive a lesson they would forever recall. Westwood High perpetually buzzed with morning activity. The echoes of laughter, the slamming of lockers, the rhythmic clatter of shoes on the tiled floor. Yet today felt different. A new student had just arrived. Jamal Maro entered through the main doors with an air of tranquility, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets, his eyes subtly surveying his surroundings. His attire wasn't ostentatious. No designer labels or expensive accessories adorned him. He wasn't attempting to attract attention, but anyone paying close observation would notice something distinct. He didn't walk like the other students. He glided, each step deliberate, as if acutely aware of his location and who was watching him. Unlike other new students, he didn't cast nervous glances around. He displayed no awkwardness or discomfort. Instead, he exuded an unusual serenity, a profound sense of command. Some students briefly regarded him before averting their gaze, while others exchanged whispers, curious about this tall, unfamiliar black student. Yet no one truly knew his identity. His father, Louis Maro, was no ordinary man. He was a legend, a name spoken in hushed tones in conversations abruptly curtailed by fear, a man whose mere presence commanded silence even from the most formidable individuals. But at Westwood, this fact remained undiscovered, at least for now. Jamal navigated the crowded Westwood hallway, sensing the weight of eyes upon him, the judgmental stares, the whispers that, though seemingly innocuous, were laden with unspoken significance. He didn't need to look back to discern their thoughts. This was a sentiment he had encountered throughout his life. The comments, disguised as casual jokes, were, in reality, steeped in prejudice. "Wow, he looks just like someone from a crime movie," one voice sneered. "I wonder if our school has a diversity policy," another chimed in. "Be careful with these guys. If they get angry, it's over." Jamal remained unmoved. He had endured such remarks his entire existence. Westwood was no different. An affluent institution where most students hailed from influential families, where status was dictated by connections and unspoken favoritism. For individuals like Ryan Carter, the world was uncomplicated. There were those in command and those beneath them. Ryan Carter, the captain of the football team, son of a prominent businessman frequently seen at mayoral fundraising events, was accustomed to a life devoid of failure or rejection. Everything came effortlessly to him, from leading the football team to gaining preferential treatment from teachers and exerting control over those he perceived as weaker. Ryan didn't aspire to be the best. He merely needed to be perceived as such. He didn't require genuine strength. He simply needed others to believe he possessed it. For him, dominance was a game, and anyone refusing to submit would inevitably pay the price. And Jamal, a new solitary black student with no allies, presented the perfect target. Ryan initiated his customary tactics, never striking immediately. He preferred to test, to probe his prey, to identify vulnerabilities before making his decisive move. It commenced with seemingly accidental shoulder nudges in the hallway, just enough to disrupt Jamal's stride, causing the books in his hands to scatter. Laughter erupted from Ryan's companions as Jamal passed by, their half-joking, half-serious comments audible enough for him to hear. "He's probably here on a scholarship. Maybe the school needed to boost its diversity numbers. Hope he's not carrying a weapon. These guys are known for their violence." These maneuvers were not novel to Jamal. He had encountered countless individuals like Ryan, those who didn't seek victory but rather the surrender of others. However, Jamal was not that kind of person. He didn't lower his head, offer an awkward smile, or react. He simply continued walking, unfazed, as if Ryan's presence were inconsequential. This indifference was precisely what agitated Ryan. He was unaccustomed to being ignored. His previous victims invariably reacted either with trembling fear or outright anger, both of which provided him with a sense of satisfaction. But Jamal offered neither. He merely proceeded as if Ryan were non-existent, a reaction that drove Ryan to the brink. Ryan Carter had never allowed anyone to make him feel invisible, and he wouldn't permit it now. If Jamal believed he could evade Ryan's attention, he was gravely mistaken. Jamal's indifference did not deter Ryan. It fueled his resolve. He was accustomed to dominating others through his sheer presence, requiring no physical force or raised voice to instill fear. A mere look, a loaded smile, a strategically whispered word, and he would elicit the desired reaction. Yet, Jamal was different. He neither responded nor bowed his head, maintaining that infuriating composure. It wasn't a display of weakness or fear, but a quiet confidence, as if he understood the game's intricacies better than anyone else. A realization that frustrated Ryan more than anything. He began to test Jamal's boundaries. The hallways of Westwood were always congested in the morning, providing an ideal setting for shoulder bumps disguised as accidental contact. Ryan didn't hesitate to forcefully collide his shoulder with Jamal's as they passed. He anticipated a furious glare, a sharp retort, some indication that he had struck a nerve. But Jamal simply continued his stride, as if Ryan were invisible. Ryan clenched his jaw, his companions, who always supported his power plays, sensing the rising tension. "He's disrespecting you, bro," one of them chimed in. "Maybe he thinks he's better than us. He probably doesn't understand how things work around here." Ryan required no reminders. He was acutely aware of the situation and was determined to prevent its continuation. One day, as Jamal was opening his locker, Ryan approached him. This time, his intention was not to shove or bump. He wanted to meet Jamal's gaze directly, to detect any flicker of hesitation, any subtle reaction he could exploit. "Hey, kid," he said slowly, his words carrying a loaded implication. "Bet you feel pretty out of place here, huh? This isn't your turf." His friends erupted in loud laughter, while a few other students glanced over, quickly averting their eyes. Jamal closed his locker, not with haste or anger, but deliberately. He turned to face Ryan, his eyes meeting Ryan's for a fleeting moment. The look was devoid of emotion, cold, but not fearful. The gaze of someone so accustomed to such confrontations that they had become utterly mundane. Ryan felt a slight shiver run down his spine, a sensation that passed quickly but was undeniably real. Jamal remained silent, simply turning and walking away, leaving Ryan standing there with a fading, awkward smile. Had he won? He had humiliated Jamal in front of everyone, asserting his dominance within the school. But why did he feel as though he had lost something? This sensation was peculiar, and Ryan detested it. He clenched his fists. If Jamal thought he could ignore him indefinitely, he was profoundly mistaken. Ryan despised the feeling of powerlessness. He had never grown accustomed to being disregarded and could not tolerate anyone who dared to stand before him without displaying fear or weakness. In the past, his bullying tactics always elicited a reaction, a plea, a humiliated bow, or at least a surge of uncontrolled anger that provided him with justification to escalate matters. But Jamal offered none of that. He simply stood there, composed, as if Ryan's provocations held no significance. This situation was untenable. During lunch, as soon as Ryan entered the cafeteria, he quickly spotted Jamal seated alone in a corner, as always, eating in complete silence. Jamal appeared unchanged, showing no signs of discontent or hesitation, no indication of being pressured by Ryan's actions. This infuriated Ryan. He couldn't allow this to continue. If others perceived that Jamal could disregard him without consequence, Ryan would forfeit the power he had always enjoyed, the ability to control the weaker individuals at will. It was no longer solely about Jamal. It was about Ryan's reputation, about how everyone in the school viewed him. He exchanged a glance with his friends, a smirk spreading across his face. They understood the unspoken signal. The amusement was about to commence. Ryan strode towards Jamal's table, deliberately raising his voice louder than usual, just enough to capture the attention of those nearby. "Look at this. All alone again. Guess nobody wants to be your friend, huh?" Laughter erupted from his friends, and a few students in proximity glanced over before quickly looking away, reluctant to become involved. They all understood the unspoken rules at Westwood. No interference, never align with the weak, and certainly never confront Ryan Carter. Jamal remained unresponsive, continuing to eat, his eyes unwavering, unconcerned by the unfolding events. Ryan clenched his teeth, awaiting a reaction, any reaction, but still there was nothing. This indifference felt like a silent declaration of war, an invisible slap that humiliated him more than any physical blow. For a moment, his mind lost all control. Acting without thought, Ryan grabbed Jamal's food tray, gripping the edges and flipping it violently. The clatter echoed as the tray slammed onto the table, scattering food everywhere. Thick sauce splattered Jamal's shirt. Drinks cascaded down his sleeves, and food remnants littered the floor. The cafeteria fell silent. Conversation ceased, laughter faded, and all eyes fixed upon them. Not a word was uttered. Some students exchanged bewildered glances, others nervously swallowed, while many quickly lowered their heads, feigning ignorance. Ryan stood there, leaning over the table, anticipating a reaction, anger, confusion, a loss of composure, anything to signify his victory. But Jamal did nothing. He calmly placed his fork on the table, regarding his stained clothing with a placid expression. He took a slow, deep breath, as if contemplating his next move. Then he looked up. There was no anger, no fear, no confusion, no indication of distress, just a look, an eerily vacant expression that felt like silence itself. A chill traced its way down Ryan's spine. He couldn't articulate why, but in that instant, he felt as though he were standing on the precipice of danger. It felt as though he were no longer the hunter, but had unknowingly ventured into the domain of a formidable, incomprehensible beast. Shaking off the peculiar sensation, Ryan told himself it was impossible. This was merely a defiant, unruly black kid who couldn't possibly unnerve him. Ryan forced a smug smile, but his voice betrayed him, becoming tense. "Don't think you're special just because you look different, kid." His friends burst into laughter, while some students lowered their heads, pretending to focus on their meals, yet everyone was aware of what had just transpired. Jamal offered no reply. He slowly rose, unhurriedly, without brushing the food from his clothes, without displaying any of the reactions Ryan anticipated. He simply turned and walked away, not glancing back, showing no sign of having been humiliated before the entire school. This silence didn't feel like surrender. It felt like a warning. Ryan stood, watching Jamal's retreating back, his smile stiffening. He had won, hadn't he? He had humiliated Jamal before everyone, reasserting his dominance. But why did he feel like he had lost something? This sensation was strange, and Ryan disliked it intensely. Yet, no matter how much he tried to reassure himself, one undeniable truth remained clear. He didn't realize it, but the game had only just begun. The crystal chandelier overhead cast a soft, golden luminescence upon the long, polished table laden with meticulously arranged dishes. The steak was cooked to perfection. The red wine shimmered in its glass, and fresh vegetables were artfully placed on pristine white plates. Everything was prepared with the characteristic precision of the household. Not a detail out of place, not a single element missing. However, tonight, the atmosphere in the dining room was different. A palpable silence hung heavy in the air. No one spoke, breaking the extended pause between the two Maro men. Jamal sat with his knife and fork resting neatly on the edge of his plate, his gaze not directed at the untouched steak before him. He was too accustomed to dinners conducted with such solemnity, governed by the unspoken rules his father had established long ago. No phone distractions, no careless eating, no idle chatter. But tonight, he wasn't eating, not due to any rule, but because his mind was occupied by other thoughts. Jamal was not easily swayed. The events of the morning at school hadn't wounded him, shaken him, or angered him, but he couldn't deny that it had left a lingering impression, not about the bullies themselves, but about how he should respond. Across from him, Louis Maro sat quietly, savoring his meal. His black hair, now streaked with gray, was impeccably combed, and his tailored suit remained perfectly unwrinkled. Though he was at an age when many men begin to disengage from power struggles, Lou still radiated an undeniable authority within the criminal underworld. He wasn't merely a person of influence. He was a name of consequence, a shadow recognized by those who truly held power, though none dared to speak of him directly. Jamal had spent his entire life under that shadow, not as a burden or a constraint, but as an invisible presence, a constant reminder that his family was unlike any other. When Louis Maro spoke, it was neither sudden nor surprising. It was as if he had known something for a considerable time, patiently awaiting the opportune moment to articulate it. "Is something amiss?" Jamal didn't respond immediately. He looked up at his father, his steady brown eyes meeting Louis's sharp, cold gaze. There was no comfort, no placating words like those most parents would offer. With Louis, there was no such thing as consolation. He was not the type to soothe his son with pleasantries. He demanded only one thing: an answer. Jamal lowered his eyes, his fingers tapping lightly on the edge of his plate, as if weighing whether to speak. Then he took a shallow breath and uttered the words he knew would initiate a conversation he couldn't evade. "Just a few delinquents who think they can bully others." A brief silence filled the room. Louis Maro didn't react instantly. He continued cutting a piece of beef from his plate, chewing slowly, as if Jamal hadn't spoken at all. But his eyes never left his son, observing him like a general surveying a battlefield before making a strategic decision. When he set down his knife and fork, the soft sound echoed in the quiet space like a bell, signaling a shift in the conversation. "Names," his voice was not loud, devoid of harshness or threat, but it carried a weight that made the room feel even more oppressive. Jamal had anticipated this question. He had foreseen that his father would not accept a perfunctory response. Louis Maro was not a man to leave things to chance. Every aspect of his life was meticulously controlled, calculated, and executed according to his design. If anyone dared to challenge his family, they would face the consequences. But Jamal wished to avoid this outcome. He shook his head, his gaze firm. "I can handle it myself." Once again, silence stretched between them. Louis studied his son for a prolonged period, as if assessing whether the statement reflected genuine confidence or was merely a declaration intended to mask helplessness. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Not a joyful or proud smile, but more of an acknowledgement, a signal that he had perceived something in his son's eyes, something he could respect. He picked up his wine glass, swirled the deep red liquid, and took a small sip. As he placed the glass down, his voice resonated, slow but heavy with significance. Good. A simple word, yet one imbued with layers of meaning. He didn't inquire again, nor did he pressure Jamal for names. Immediately afterward, he said something Jamal knew he would never forget. "But remember, son." He tilted his head slightly, his eyes studying Jamal with careful consideration. "Sometimes an adversary needs a reminder of their place." Jamal didn't respond immediately. He understood perfectly what his father meant. He could handle it, but Louis Maro wasn't referring to handling it in the conventional sense. He didn't believe in merely enduring or waiting. In his world, power wasn't about avoidance or overlooking. It was about control. Jamal took a deep breath. He was not like his father, nor did he wish to be, but there was one thing he couldn't deny. He would never allow anyone else to dictate his destiny. If Ryan Carter believed he could push him around without repercussions, he had made a grave miscalculation. Jamal placed his knife and fork down, leaned back in his chair, his gaze growing colder. Perhaps it was time for Ryan Carter to comprehend precisely with whom he was dealing. The name Jamal Maro began to circulate through the hallways, spreading like a gentle breeze, yet carrying the weight of an impending storm. The whispers no longer ceased when Ryan passed by as they once did. Now, they continued, sometimes mere fragments of words, other times furtive glances filled with hesitation. Though no one spoke of it directly, he could sense the shift. Jamal's silence was no longer a perceived sign of weakness, as he had initially believed. It now felt like a warning. He took a deep breath, attempting to steady himself, but the unease continued to creep into his veins. He couldn't endure this. He needed confirmation that this was merely a foolish misunderstanding. A student walked by, a sophomore whose name Ryan couldn't recall, but at that moment it was irrelevant. He grabbed the boy by the shoulder, his voice lower than usual, tinged with urgency. "Maro? Like Lou Maro?" The boy paled, his eyes wide as if confronted with an unspeakable question. He didn't respond immediately, merely swallowed hard, as if deciding whether or not to speak. That hesitation conveyed everything. Ryan felt his heartbeat quicken, each throb echoing in his chest like a hammer striking cold steel. He released the boy's shoulder and took a step back. No words were necessary. He knew the answer. Louis Maro, the name his father had even mentioned in significant meetings, with a tone Ryan had never heard from him before. Once he overheard his father on the phone late one night, his voice quieter, more measured, no longer the confident man who typically controlled every conversation. He had mentioned that name, Louis Maro, and then fallen silent, as if uttering the name itself was enough to alter the conversation's trajectory. He remembered the feeling then, a strange sensation because it was the first time he had witnessed his father display hesitation. And now, he understood why. His mind began to connect all the dots, everything he had heard, everything he had done over the past week. He hadn't just bullied the wrong person. He had crossed the son of someone whom the entire underworld respected. The laughter, the taunts, the sneers, the overturned lunch tray in the cafeteria. Each image flashed in his mind, each one a blade carving deeper into his awareness of the grave mistake he had made. "No, no way," he muttered, but his voice lacked its former certainty. The more he tried to deny it, the more the pieces seemed to fall into place on their own. Jamal Maro hadn't reacted like everyone else because he didn't need to. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to fight back, didn't need to display anger, because he understood all of that was unnecessary. He knew that fear would inevitably find its way to Ryan. A chill ran down Ryan's spine. It was no longer frustration, no longer the discomfort of being ignored. This was genuine fear. The students around him continued to move through the hallways, chatting and laughing as usual, but for Ryan, everything felt distant. The card in his coat pocket seemed heavier than before. He remembered the small, embossed words on its back. "Play with fire, you'll get burned." It wasn't a direct threat, not a crude message like those bullies typically received when they picked the wrong confrontation. It was simply a reminder, a simple, clear truth that required no further explanation. Ryan swallowed hard, his hands slowly clenching into fists. He felt as though the ground beneath him had suddenly become unstable, as if he were walking on thin ice that could shatter at any moment. The student in front of him still stood there, but his gaze no longer met Ryan's. He stepped back slightly, as if being near Ryan had already become a risk. For the first time in his life, Ryan Carter felt small. He turned and walked away, not heading to class, not with any specific destination in mind. He simply knew he had to leave, immediately, but no matter how fast he walked, no matter how hard he tried to dismiss the truth, one thing remained unchangeable. The nightmare had begun, and this was merely the prelude. Ryan couldn't recall the remainder of his lessons. The words on the board, the teacher's lectures, the scratch of pens on paper. Everything became a meaningless stream of sounds, passing by like a dull film. He couldn't focus, couldn't think clearly, because his mind was consumed by a single thought. He had provoked the wrong person. The card in his jacket pocket remained, a cold reminder that it was not over. He could feel it through the fabric, as if it were growing warmer, as if it might ignite at any moment. The furtive glances in the hallway no longer conveyed admiration or deference they once had. No one clapped him on the back, no one laughed as he passed. The atmosphere around him had shifted. He was no longer the predator. He was becoming the prey, and that made it difficult for him to breathe. The bell rang. Ryan stepped out of the school's main entrance with a heavy feeling in his chest. He didn't want to linger. His instincts urged him to leave as quickly as possible, but as soon as he stepped into the school's front yard, an uneasy sensation crept into his mind. Something was wrong. Every day, the scene in front of the school was familiar. Students spilling out in groups, cars lined up on the road, parents waiting for their children, the cacophony of conversations. But today, amidst the crowd, two men stood out in a way Ryan couldn't ignore. They weren't students, nor were they parents. They stood a few steps from the school gate, dressed sharply, not ostentatiously, but not like ordinary people either. Their shirts were well fitted, trousers neatly pressed, shoes polished. Everything about them exuded cleanliness and order, yet there was nothing casual about their demeanor. These weren't random men. They were here for him. Ryan realized it instantly, and that awareness caused his breath to falter. He had never met them before, but he recognized people like them, individuals who didn't need to speak much or do anything out of the ordinary. Their mere presence was enough to make others feel uneasy. They weren't bodyguards, nor were they police officers. They were Maro's men. As Ryan stopped, one of the men looked directly at him and offered a slight smile. The smile wasn't friendly. It was merely a formality. "Mr. Maro wishes to speak." The voice was deep, unhurried, no overt threat necessary. It was simply a statement, as if Ryan's agreement or disagreement were irrelevant. Ryan felt a cold sweat break out on his back. He could run, he could scream, create a scene right in the middle of the schoolyard, do anything to attract the attention of teachers or security. But he did nothing, because deep down he knew it would be futile. This wasn't an invitation. It was a command. Ryan swallowed hard, his throat dry. The familiar feeling of control, of power, of invulnerability he once possessed was now merely an empty shell. He was no longer the one issuing orders. He was the recipient. He couldn't recall how he followed the two men. Everything seemed to happen in a haze. The crowd of students continued their chatter. Cars still moved. Teachers still exited the building, but everything felt distant. Ryan was stepping into a world he didn't understand, a world he should never have entered. They led him to the parking lot behind the school, a place typically reserved for teachers and staff. Not many people were around, a perfect setting for private conversations. And there, beside a gleaming black car, someone was waiting for him. No need for introductions, no need for names. Ryan knew exactly who it was. Jamal Maro was leaning against the car, his hands in his coat pockets, his gaze calm, as though this were merely an ordinary meeting. There was no sign of anger, no hint of aggression or desire for revenge. But that was the most frightening aspect of all. Someone about to enact revenge would lose control. Someone possessing complete control wouldn't need to do anything. Ryan stopped, not daring to take another step. His fingers involuntarily clenched, but he no longer felt any strength in them. He was no longer the one directing the narrative. Jamal slowly looked up, his sharp eyes meeting Ryan's. In that moment, Ryan realized something that sent a chill down his spine. Jamal had never been the prey. He had merely been waiting for the opportune moment to reveal himself as the true predator. Ryan Carter had faced numerous challenging situations before, Scuffles after football games, confrontations with teachers for cheating, even troubles he himself had instigated simply to test his limits. But he had never felt as cornered as he did now. He stood there, his back stiff, his eyes wide open, staring at Jamal. But he couldn't speak. The two men behind him remained motionless, no orders given, no pressure applied, yet their presence felt like two invisible walls, precluding any chance of escape or resistance. In front of him, Jamal remained composed, his deep eyes seeming to penetrate Ryan's very mind. There was no anger, no hatred, no indication of someone seeking retribution. There was only one thing: control. "Do you think I'm weak?" Jamal asked gently, his voice low and slow, each word resonating in Ryan's mind. Ryan didn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't dare. Any response now would be a mistake. He couldn't say yes, because he knew that would be the most foolish thing he could ever utter. But he also couldn't say no, because that would be an admission of his own weakness. Jamal stared at him for a moment, as if assessing his response, then took a step forward, neither fast nor slow, but the space between them immediately became suffocating. Ryan didn't step back, but he could feel his body tense. Then, Jamal leaned in, coming so close that Ryan could feel his breath brush his ear as he whispered, "I don't need to touch you, but if I wanted to, your life would change forever." Ryan's back was slick with sweat. That was not an ordinary threat. It wasn't like the hollow words he'd heard from petty thugs posturing as tough guys, nor like the warnings he'd received from his teachers or coaches. It was the truth. Because when Jamal spoke those words, Ryan believed every single one of them. He could feel the certainty in Jamal's voice, a cold, unshakable conviction. It didn't require proof. It didn't need explanation because it wasn't an empty threat. It was a reality Ryan had to confront. If Jamal wished, he could do something right now. No beating, no shouting, no drawing attention. A single phone call, a single word to the right person, and Ryan Carter would never be the same again. Not in a simple way like expulsion or removal from the football team, but in a much deeper, permanent, irreparable manner. Ryan could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but he couldn't control it. Jamal slowly stepped back, his eyes unchanged. He didn't need to elaborate further because the message was already crystal clear. Ryan had lost. There was nothing he could do but stand there and accept it. That feeling, it was like being stripped bare, as if every illusion of power, fame, and control he once possessed had been ripped away in mere minutes. All that he had done, all that he had believed, meant nothing in the face of the person standing before him. Jamal didn't need to beat him, didn't need to push him, didn't need to humiliate him. He only needed Ryan to understand that he no longer controlled his own fate. Ryan didn't know how long he had stood there, but when Jamal finally turned away, the relief never came because he knew it wasn't over. It had just begun. Ryan stood there, his feet seemingly rooted to the cold concrete of the parking lot, his hands instinctively clenching at his sides, but devoid of any remaining strength. His shirt was soaked with sweat, despite the afternoon not being particularly warm. Jamal had turned and walked away, but the pressure still weighed heavily on his chest. The boy's presence lingered, as if Ryan was still trapped in an invisible grip, with no means of escape. The two strange men stood in the same spot, silent, not laughing, not saying a word, not doing anything to threaten him, but it was precisely their inaction that was most terrifying. They didn't need to touch him because everything had already been decided. He felt the world he once trusted, the world where he believed he held power, reputation, and could control everything at will, crumbling piece by piece. Jamal didn't just prove that Ryan couldn't control him. He proved that Ryan never truly had control over anything. He couldn't recall how he left the parking lot. His feet moved aimlessly, each breath heavy, his mind completely blank. He simply wanted to leave, to go home, to find somewhere he could feel safer. But was anywhere truly safe? As he walked into the student parking lot where his black Mustang was parked, he pulled out his phone by habit. He wasn't sure what he was going to do. Call someone, text his father, try to make sense of everything that had just happened. But when he turned the screen on, a new message awaited from an unknown number. His eyes quickly scanned the words on the screen, and as those words burned into his mind, his heart seemed to stop. Tell your dad to watch out for his work. Accidents can happen. Ryan felt his heart plummet into his stomach. No, this couldn't be real. He read the message again, hoping he had misread it, that it was just a cruel prank from someone. But the words on the screen didn't change. It was simple, short, not threatening, not loud, but it carried a weight he had never felt before. He stared at the screen, his fingers frozen, unable to press any key. For a moment, he told himself it could just be a prank, but then he realized Jamal didn't need to joke around. Jamal didn't need to send empty threats, because if he wanted to, this message wasn't a warning. It was a truth waiting to happen. Ryan felt his body grow cold. He had never imagined that petty school bullying could lead to something like this. He had always believed he was in control, that he could humiliate anyone without consequence, that no one could stand against him. But now he realized he hadn't just picked the wrong person. He had stumbled into a world he didn't belong to. Jamal didn't need to lift a finger, didn't need to hit him, didn't need to humiliate him in front of the whole school. He just needed to show him a fraction of what he could do, and that was enough to swallow Ryan whole in fear. His hand shook as he tried to shove the phone into his pocket. He wanted to forget the message, pretend it never existed, but no matter how hard he tried, those words still echoed in his mind, drilling into his brain like a sharp knife. Tell your dad to watch out. Accidents can happen. He had never considered his father being in danger. Ryan wasn't easily frightened. He had grown up in a family where power was wielded as a weapon. His father was a prominent businessman with connections to influential people, sitting at the same table as the mayor, and those who could decide the fate of an entire neighborhood with a mere phone call. But no matter how powerful his father was, he wasn't Louis Maro. And now, Ryan wasn't sure if his father's connections were strong enough to protect him. What should he do? Pretend nothing happened? Pretend he was still in control, that everything would be fine? Or should he tell his father? But if he told him, he would have to admit everything, admit that he had made a terrible mistake, admit that he had endangered his family, admit that he had lost. Ryan stood motionless in front of the car, his breath heavy, his heart pounding so hard he could feel each beat in his throat. His hand slowly unlocked the car, but he didn't get in right away. He just stood there, his mind blank. For the first time in his life, he felt helpless, with no way out, no one to call for help, no way to regain control, because this time, he wasn't the one setting the rules. This time, he was merely a pawn, already checkmated. Ryan Carter was no longer himself. He used to be the center of attention, a dominant figure in the school hallways, the leader of the pack, someone who never bowed to anyone. But now, he was just a shadow. No one knew precisely what had changed. He still showed up at school every day, still wore his football jacket, still walked through the familiar hallways, but something was different. He no longer smiled. He didn't talk much. He didn't look for someone to pick on. The students who used to follow him, his old friends, those who cheered him on when he cornered someone, laughing with delight when he humiliated someone in front of everyone, they now kept their distance. No one said anything, but everyone could sense it. Ryan Carter had changed, and Jamal Maro hadn't had to do a thing. For the first time, Ryan realized that true fear didn't originate from punches or threats. It stemmed from silence. Jamal's silence was what haunted him the most. No public retribution, no loud confrontations, no rumors of a retaliatory plan, just absolute silence. And it was this silence that drove him to the brink of madness. Ryan had hoped that if Jamal planned to exact revenge, he would do it immediately. A punch, a fight, a direct threat, anything as long as it was visible. But Jamal didn't need to do any of that because fear found Ryan all on its own, without any intervention. For the first time, Ryan knew what it felt like to lose control. He began to avoid. If he saw Jamal in the hallway, he would turn the other way. If Jamal entered the cafeteria, he would grab food quickly and leave. If Jamal appeared in class, he would remain silent throughout the lesson. No longer the one to mock someone as he once did, no one spoke of it directly. No one openly stated that Ryan was afraid of Jamal, but everyone saw it in his every action. In the initial days, he tried to convince himself that it was just a temporary feeling, but the longer time passed, the worse it became. The nightmare began to creep into his life in ways he couldn't control. His dreams became disturbed. He saw himself standing in a dark room, utterly alone, with only whispers echoing in the darkness. No threats, no shouting, just a soft, powerful voice whispering in his ear like a snake coiling around his neck. "Do you think I'm weak?" Ryan jolted awake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart raced as if another message would appear, a message that didn't say much, just a reminder that he was being watched. But nothing came. Jamal didn't text, didn't seek him out, didn't look at him for more than a second. Jamal didn't need to do anything. Fear now resided within Ryan. He no longer needed anyone to threaten him. His own mind had become the instrument of his punishment. His former loyalists were gone. His friends noticed the change and quickly distanced themselves from him. No one wanted to be near someone who had lost their power. Those who used to follow him, laugh with him, cheer for him, they now whispered behind his back as if he were a disease they wished to avoid contracting. No one saw him as the strongest anymore because the strongest never fear, and Ryan, now, lived in fear. A week after the encounter in the parking lot, Ryan realized that he had become a shadow in his own life. He no longer cared about showing off in front of others. No longer cared about his reputation, no longer cared about proving anything because all he could do was survive. Not anger anyone, not disturb anyone, not draw attention, simply stay safe. But deep inside, he knew a terrifying truth. He would never feel safe again, because now he understood what happened when you provoked the wrong person. Jamal Maro didn't need to beat him, didn't need to threaten him, didn't need to do anything. He just needed to let Ryan destroy himself, and that was the most dreadful punishment of all. Jamal Maro didn't need to lift a finger, didn't need to hit Ryan, didn't need to threaten him, didn't need to create a scene or instigate pointless fights. All he had to do was let him comprehend that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Fear doesn't stem from external injuries. It originates from what cannot be seen. Ryan Carter was no longer the dominant figure at Westwood. He was merely a walking corpse, a beast that once ruled the forest but was now prey to its own fear. And Jamal, he had never required violence to achieve victory. As the days progressed, Jamal's silence transformed into a palpable presence that dominated Ryan's existence. No one spoke of it directly, but everyone in the school sensed the shift. Once Ryan Carter was the person people had to be wary of when he entered a room. He commanded the space, compelling everyone to acknowledge his presence in some manner, a sarcastic pat on the back, a sharp quip, a smirk when he watched someone awkwardly bow their head. But now, everything had reversed. Now, when Jamal entered a room, no one dared to meet his gaze for too long. It wasn't out of fear, as Ryan once propagated, a fear built on coercion and bullying, but a subtler, more insidious apprehension, the fear of those who don't need to demonstrate their power because everyone inherently knows they possess it. Jamal never spoke unless necessary, never reveled in Ryan's downfall, and simply continued his life quietly, confidently, and unchanged. But it was precisely this lack of change that instilled fear in everyone. Jamal didn't need to feign an attitude to protect himself because he no longer required it. Ryan Carter understood this better than anyone. He no longer dared to meet Jamal's eyes, no longer dared to enter the same room as him without feeling suffocated. Every time he passed Jamal in the hallway, he felt as though something were choking him, a silent panic, a sensation of being watched, even if no one was actually looking at him. Perhaps it was merely an illusion, or perhaps it was the truth, because once you fall under Jamal Maro's influence, no one escapes. Everything might have concluded there if not for what transpired on a Friday afternoon. Ryan left school later than usual that day. He no longer lingered on the football field or socialized with his friends after classes. He simply wanted to get home as quickly as possible. But as he walked toward the parking lot, the sight nearly made him stop breathing. Jamal was standing there, right beside his car. He wasn't doing anything, not touching the car, not adopting an intimidating posture. He was simply waiting. Ryan froze. He didn't know what to do. Should he run? But where would he go? Should he confront him? But he knew he stood no chance. He could do nothing but stand there, anticipating the next nightmare. Jamal stared at him for a long time, then slowly walked towards him. Ryan felt every second stretch out like a century. Then, when they were only a few steps apart, Jamal stopped. He didn't smile, didn't look angry. He simply looked Ryan straight in the eye, a gaze that made Ryan feel smaller than he ever had. Then he spoke one sentence, just one sentence, a sentence Ryan would never, ever forget. Do you understand now? No threat, no warning, no violence. Just one simple question, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened. Ryan couldn't utter a word. He didn't need to answer. Jamal knew that he understood. He had truly understood, and that was the most terrifying realization of all. Ryan Carter stood there, speechless. Jamal hadn't threatened him. He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to appear intimidating. He simply looked at him with eyes devoid of any hatred, cruelty, or anger, only an absolute calmness. But it was that calmness that was the most terrifying aspect of all. Ryan understood, and Jamal knew that he had understood. That moment lasted only a few seconds, but to Ryan, it felt as though Jamal had etched an everlasting mark on his life. Jamal didn't need to do anything further. He had won. Ryan never reverted to his former self. In the days that followed, he continued to attend school, but no longer as himself. He no longer ruled the hallways, no longer controlled his friends like puppets, no longer was the person everyone feared or admired. He was merely a shadow of his former self. A few students whispered about his sudden transformation. Some thought he was preoccupied with something, others guessed that something had occurred, but no one knew for sure, and more importantly, no one dared to inquire. Because there was one thing everyone knew. Jamal Maro had done absolutely nothing. No violence, no direct threats, nothing that could be considered a concrete action, but the outcome was undeniable. Ryan Carter had been defeated without a single punch being thrown. Jamal continued his life as before, without needing to alter anything. He never boasted about what had happened, never acted arrogantly, nor sought to assert his power because he didn't need to. Those who understood had already understood. Those who intended to challenge him had backed down. Whispers about him only grew louder, but no one dared to confront him directly anymore. Jamal Maro didn't need to be aggressive to command respect. His silence had become his most potent weapon. True power isn't found in physical strength, nor in asserting oneself vocally, nor in boasting or demanding acknowledgement. True power is when others realize on their own that they should not challenge you, requiring no fight, no proof, simply existing, and they will withdraw. Ryan Carter would never forget. He would never dare to approach Jamal again, not because he feared a physical altercation, but because he understood he couldn't contend with something he couldn't control. And absolute control always resided with Jamal. He once believed he understood the nature of power, but now he realized that true power doesn't stem from domination. It originates from control, and Jamal Maro was the one who commanded everything. Ryan Carter had once been the most formidable person in school, the one no one dared to oppose, but after a single misstep, he lost everything. Not because he was defeated in a confrontation, but because he had challenged the wrong individual. Jamal Maro didn't need a fist to triumph. No need to shout, no need to prove anything. He simply needed Ryan to realize that he had forfeited his power permanently, because true power doesn't manifest through threats. It emanates from absolute control. What are your thoughts on how Jamal handled the bully? Do you believe that silence and intangible power are more potent than violence? Share your perspectives in the comments below. If you enjoyed this narrative, please remember to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss out on more compelling content. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in future videos.